Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Fabric Coffee session at Microsoft Fabric Cafe. My name is Merdad Abdullah, the community lead of this great community and Microsoft Learn Expert. I'm very glad to be back to the stage for a couple of weeks. I've been away, and thanks a lot to Sina for his support in my absence. And so for today's session, let's see what we have. And let me just share my screen. Today, November 2nd of 2024, Fabric Coffee session number 13. As usual, we will have some introduction. The AI skill challenge is done yesterday. We have to just remove this one from our slide. But we have a great speaker today, Dhyanendra Singh Rathore, and he will have the Q&A section in today's session. And of course, like other days, we have riddles and prizes. Just please be informed that the answers for those riddles only will be acceptable on StreamYard. So you have time to just switch to the StreamYard. You can find the link to the session in the in our YouTube, in our LinkedIn page. So Microsoft Learn community, the great place for learning and connecting with the other learners and finding your Learn experts, finding the learning room that you are looking for based on your interest. Especially, you can just join Microsoft Fabric Cafe learning room, where we just focus on Microsoft Fabric, and we will provide learning and support to Fabric users in all levels. It is a forum for everyone to learn, share, and grow skills together. Here we have the our social medias, the YouTube channel. Feel free to subscribe to that for all the past sessions, or for the upcoming sessions. You've been actually informed and notified when a new content is available there, and it is going to support the community. The LinkedIn page, the QR code just lands you in our LinkedIn page, where we announce the whatever that is coming from Microsoft Fabric or from the community, as well as Microsoft Learn. And feel free to join the learning room. We can chat more there. We can just connect with the other learners and learn from each other. There's a code of conduct in our learning room. Thank you very much in advance for adhering to this code of conduct. And for the October sessions, where we had the AI skill challenge, we had 6 actually sessions, but unfortunately for some technical issues and availability issues from my side, we had to reschedule 2 of them for November, and one of them was actually rescheduled for December. But thanks the other speakers who added value to the community. And for November, we've got other 5 great sessions with great speakers. 2 of the sessions are rescheduled from actually from the previous month. But for today, we have Dhyanendra Singh Rathore, enforcing Power BI best practices with Azure DevOps. And just let me add Dhyan to this stage. Hey, Dhyan, how's it going?
Hey, Mehrdad, how's it going today?
Good,
It's a lovely day
good.
in
Thank you
Sweden.
very much. Awesome. Cool. Dhyan is from Sweden, the cold Sweden. Yeah. And today is a special day in Sweden. And thank you, Dhyan, for making yourself available and for the community. So if you want to introduce yourself, or if you want, you can just jump to your slides and let's learn together about Fabric. and
Thank you
Power
for having me here, Meherdat. Hello, everyone. Let's start with introductions then. So I am Dhyanendra Singh Rathore. You can call me Dhyan. So I live in Stockholm, Sweden, the dark, cold Sweden. I work as a Power BI tech lead at Autoliv. And those of you who don't know about Autoliv, we make car safety equipment. So if you are driving a car, there's a 50% chance that the seat belt or airbags or security equipment is made by Autoliv. So we are a global company. I'm a
Okay.
tech blogger and speaker. So I've been in the field for almost a decade and mostly focus on automation and optimization because I consider myself to be a bit lazy when it comes to doing manual tasks. So automation and optimization is where I focus most. And then when I'm not working, I like to watch a lot of anime and I like to go hiking, but no hiking in winters in Sweden. So anime in winters and hiking in summers. That's how I divide my time. So I mostly talk about and blog about Power BI, Power Automate, and Fabric. You can
Awesome.
find me on LinkedIn. And I also have a personal blog that I call bits2bi.com. And at the end of the session, if you would like to revisit some of the content, or if you think this is something you would like to do it for your project or your work stuff or your team, then you can find a detailed article on my blog where you have all the instructions.
Awesome. Cool. Cool, Tian. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Thank you.
I will be in the backstage, Tian, and I will hand over the session to you. And for all attendees, you can just add your comments and questions in the comment section, and they will be answered at the end of the session when Tian is done with his presentation and also the demo. With that said, we've got actually a comment from Honoria. Beautiful day to everyone from Nigeria, Delta State. Everyone, hey, and I've got my coffee. I will be in the backstage and enjoy the session. Yeah, stage is yours. I'll be back soon. Cheers.
Thank you. All right, everyone, let's get started. So today's agenda, first we will talk about best practices. What are they? Then we will see what is the status of best practices today, how it is done today. Then we will look at how can you enforce those best practices with DevOps. That's the main goal for this session today. There'll be some demos. There will be two different demos. One is more like a showcase. Another one is an actual demo where I will show you how it is done. Then we will talk about some benefits and of course some limitations because nothing is without any limitations, right? Then I'll take all the questions that you have in the end. So you provide the questions and I will try my best to provide the answers. And in the end, as Mehrdad mentioned, we will have some riddles and then you have chance to win some fancy prizes. All right, so before I get started and start sharing my deck, I would like to share the motivation behind this session or why did this idea occur to me in the first place. So as my job as Power BI tech lead, I work with a lot of different teams in my organization. And one challenge that comes is there are different skill set levels. So there are some people who's really proficient with what they do. They know Power BI end to end. They are really good at doing that. And in the same team, sometimes it could happen that there's a new joiner, there's somebody who's switching teams, there's somebody who's new to Power BI, somebody who's a totally fresh out of the graduation straight away. And in those teams, one challenge that occurs is maybe there's one data model that's built by somebody who's quite proficient. And then when the newbie or the private starts working on them, they could mess up some of the things that has already been set up, right? And that kind of brings us like, how do we harmonize these changes that we don't overwrite each other's changes? We don't mess up uh, the perfectly or at least well-designed model or well-coded report is not getting messed up by somebody who's new or who doesn't know what are our best practices or standards here. And that was the inspiration and motivation. And then when the Git integration was released, we looked into it and see, can we leverage it somehow? Can we automate some of the quality test? And that's why we are here today. And I'll share with you how we are doing it or how you can do it for your use cases or your projects. All right, so first thing, what are best practices? So here's the dictionary definition of best practices, right? So these are established techniques, methods, and processes, and they are the most effective in delivering results. And they are specific to one particular field or an activity. So you have a best practices for manufacturing, and that might not be a best practices when you try to apply it in logistics because the nature of those activities are different. They talk about different things, they have different challenges. So it's related to there are multiple ways of doing one thing, right? But one of those ways might be better than other ways. And that could depend based on maybe it's more cost efficient, maybe it's more time efficient, maybe it takes less time to do it, maybe it tries to address the errors that you will encounter in future, like we call it future proofing, so on and so forth. So those are the best practices. Then next you might ask, how do you get those best practices? Who defines what is a best practice? So best practices are usually learned from either your own experience or from somebody else's experience. So it's by learning from somebody else's experience. And usually, if you look at Microsoft Tech Scope, whenever a new tech is released, like now we have Fabric. So there are experts who's working on Fabric, and they are learning from their mistakes, their experiences, and the project they are implementing or things they are doing. And over those couple of days, couple of months or years, they will realize there is one method that works better than others. And then that will become a best practice. And usually Microsoft itself, they release a white paper or best practices or recommended practices, and it's available to community to utilize for free, right? Let's look at a simple example to understand more about the best practices. So a simplest one. So we want to calculate our sales margin percentage. Formula is simple. You take the sales, then you subtract the cost from sales, and then you divide it by sales, and you multiply by 100. And it's a simple formula. We have all used it if it's not in case of margin percentage, but then to maybe calculate some other kind of percentages, right? But we have all used this formula. So that's the textbook formula. How do we write it in Power BI? We write it in Power BI with text. Let's try to turn it into a DAX. Simple. You have margin percentage equal to you have one DAX measure that calculates your margin, that's sales minus cost. And then you have the sales, you divide it by sales. So this formula gives you the answer. But there is one big problem with this formula. And the problem is, let's say you bring it out to a report, you put it in a visual, and then you have multiple filters, some other visuals on the page. And then when you publish it in production or in app or report, anyhow, so a user is looking at it. And now the user has the flexibility to select any of the slicers or filters that you have added, or they can click one of the visuals to cross filter this visual, the one that's using this margin percentage measure. What will happen in that case? If sales evaluates to be 0, you are dividing the margin by 0. And that just simply doesn't work, right? We all know we don't divide by 0. The answer is either it's an infinity or you get thrown an error on your face. So it's like a measure of death. So you're putting yourself and your user in a situation where it might lead to results that you don't want them to see. It affects their user experience. Like, so until now, Power BI used to throw this divide by 0 error. So in that case, you have this visual of death, which just says something is wrong with the measure, you need to change it. Or now they show you infinity. So if you use this measure in real life, instead of giving an error, you get a bar or you get a number that just says infinity. And that's not accurate. That's not the correct representation of the data based on filter selection. So we can't really use it in a real life situation. We shouldn't be using this in the real life situation, right? Let's try to see how do we fix it. So here's the same formula. Here's our DEX measure that we know is problematic. Let's try to recode it. Let's try to write it in a different way so we address this infinity or divide by 0 error. The first approach is, how about we check the sales? And if the sales is greater than 0, only then we do the division. And if it's not, we return a blank. That's the one approach. That's one way of doing things. Then there's another way of doing things, and that is if we use if error function. It's another dash function. It checks if the evaluation of margin by sales returns in an error, then it will return you a blank. Otherwise, it returns the result. Let's look at third way of doing that. Then we have this divide function. There's another function that's made by DEX. It's available in DEX. And what it does is it kind of does the same thing that other two do, right? It takes the margin divided by the sales. If it returns any error, then you get a blank. Otherwise, you get the actual result. So here we have 4 ways of writing the same formula. So we have looked at all 4. And now let's look at how do they function in a real life. If we try to put it in a report, what are the pros and cons? The first one we know is going to give you an error, or it's going to show you an infinity. We don't want that. So maybe second, third, or fourth option is somewhere we are trying to go to. Let's look at how do they do when it comes to performance, right? So here I have some average execution time in milliseconds. First, I'm checking it for a data set that has just 2 million rows. The first approach gives me 61 millisecond, second one 76, and then 89, and then 65. So from that, you can see second and third is a bit more expensive. It's more time consuming when it comes to performance or execution time, right? So it's like either one and fourth. But that's not enough to just compare or decide one of them. Let's look at another case. Now, if I change it to 21 million rows, I'm increasing the number of rows in my fact table. And then we see the execution time. The first one increases 78, and the fourth one divide almost same, 79, right? Not much of a difference. It's hardly noticeable. The approach second and third, it just kind of like almost doubles up. So, now looking at it, it's easy to see which one should you go for. So if I look at the 21 million row average execution time, I should either take the first approach or I should go with the fourth approach. But now I know the first approach has a problem with it. So I should go with the fourth approach. And that's my winner. And that's how I have a best practice now. So now for all my future work items, projects, tasks, whatever you call it, whenever I have an requirement to do a division, I'll go with the fourth approach. I will use the divide function and get my results out, right? So that's how best practices are defined. Now let's look at some other advantages. Why are they important? Why do we need that in the first place? First one, enhanced quality. We just recently looked at that, right? So if I use the best practices and they are lessons learned from my own mistakes, maybe community's mistake, maybe somebody else's mistake, they give you a consistent outcomes and your reports are more accurate. So you know the formula that you are using or the best practices are using, they are coded in that way or they are designed in a way that they improves your accuracy, and then your outcomes are always consistent. So if you use divide function and user selects invalid uh, combinations of filters or slicers, they won't get infinity as an answer, they will get a blank. So the outcome is always consistent. We mitigate the risk with it. So there are some cases where we don't know what's going to happen, like maybe some invalid filter selection same, or the number of rows increase, or there is some problem with the relationships. And then we know by using best practices, we are mitigating those risks. We might not be able to test all of them. We might not be able to think about all of them, but because they are already available as best practices, we are avoiding those common pitfalls, the common mistakes that everyone make. Then it allows you to do faster problem solving because you don't have to learn it by yourself. So if you look at it, now I have showed you the example, you don't have to go through it by yourself. You can just take my advice for it, or in this case, take community's advice for it. So you have a reduced learning curve. And when you do all those three of this, when you put all these three together, you know you are saving your time. You are performing better, you are delivering this better, you are saving your cost in the terms of performance, memory, and your own time. And you are more efficient because you have used other people's lessons to build a performant report, a better functioning report, right? So these are a couple of importance that I think are why we should use best practices in everyday practice. Next, let's look at what is the status of best practices today. How do they look like today, right? So there have been a couple of improvements over the past few years. So first thing, the best practices that we talk about that use divide function, for example, they are now available as codified JSON rules. And we will look at how those JSON rules looks like. And then second, and then important part is there are open source community tools available. And those tools are free. And you can use those tools to evaluate your semantic models or your reports and see if any of the best practices available in the community are being violated. And even for this demo today, we will use those open source community tools. So first, for semantic model, we have Best Practice Analyzer, shortened to PBA within Tabulator 2. It's also available in Tabulator 3, but that's a paid version. But for this demo, or if you don't want to pay additional license costs, then you can use the same functionality within Tabulator 2. Then for reports, we have a different tool called PBI Inspector. Now, both are open source, both are available on GitHub. You can download them, you can look at the code. There could be other tools who are also doing the same thing. There are maybe other tools who can evaluate for semantic model, for reports, but for today, we will use these two tools, right? Now let's look at how does those codified JSON rules looks like. Let's understand just a bit. Okay, so here's one of the rule from semantic model. It's for the example that we talk about, use divide instead of just a divide operator. So each JSON rule for semantic model has some common attributes. So you have an ID, then you have a name, you have a category. So it could be a DEX expression, it could be a performance related. So we have different categories. And then we have a description, just so you know what it's about. Then it can have a reference to a link like what we are talking about, or if you can find more guidance or information on that. Then we have something called as severity. We'll come back to it in a second. Then we have the scope. So scope decides where do you want to evaluate this best practice. Is it at the measure level? Is it at the calculate column level or calculation item level? Then you have an expression. Expression is the way we evaluate it. So it could be a regular expression or it could be another a link expression. And that's how we evaluate whether something is violating a best practice. And then you have a compatibility level. I will not go into that right now, right? So let's look at severity. And that's the most important part to look at for us, because this is what is going to help us take the best out of our best practices. So one of the best thing about best practices is that they are customizable. You can customize it. Remember, we talk about they change from industry to industry or activity to activity, right? So it could be that in one industry, something is best practice. Or let's keep it to our example, right? In our example of divide function, if you have a denominator that could change based on filter selection, you should use always the divide function. But what if you have a fixed denominator that will never change? You have, let's say, 5 as your denominator. In that case, you don't need to use divide function because you know it's never going to be 0 or blank, right? So severity has an impact on that. And then when we talk about severity, there are 3 possible values. And so right now, this example has number 2. So it could be 1. And when it's 1, so you know 1 is for informational message. That means the rule that we're talking about is not very important. It's just about cosmetics and making things look nice. Second is warning. And as programmer, we don't care about warnings, right? We just focus on errors. But here, warning represents its minor importance and it may cause end user confusion or some user experience issue. For example, even if you don't use divide operator, a divide function and use the operator instead, it's not breaking things, right? It's not an optimal user experience. They will just see infinity or a divide by 0 error, but it's not harming their business decision or any other performance impact. Then the third and most important here is the error. And then the error ones are really important. And if you don't follow them, it could cause some functional issues, maybe some performance degradation, or there are some other logical errors, right? So remember this severity. They will help us to reclassify whether we want one of the rules to apply or if you want to break our execution for one of the rules. And we will look at it, how does it work in a second. Second, let's look at how does the JSON rules for report look like. So because the metadata of JSON semantic model and the report are totally different. So if you have used PBIP or TIMDAL recently, you can see the JSON structure of both model and report. And you will see they use different attributes. They have entirely different structure from each other. So that's why there are different ways of coding the JSON rules, and there are different tools that allow you to execute those rules. So for report, a bunch of attributes are same. You have a name, description, and then you have a disabled flag. Let's say I don't want to enable this rule, then you can just disable true. Or if you want to make sure that this rule is always evaluated against your report, you just disable equal to false and so on. Then important one, or let's say the cousin of severity here is the log type. And for report JSON rules, we have 2 different log types. We have errors and we have warnings. And this one, the example we have is warning. And the description or importance is kind of the same. Warning is it's a minor importance rule. It may cause some confusion or less than optimal user experience, but it's not a big problem. Error means it could have some functional issues or performance degradation or something that we should totally look at, right? Let's look at how do they look like today, right? So I'll quickly switch my screen and I'll show you the model I have. So I have one Power BI report here. Then I have this tabular editor here. So this is the tool we use to evaluate semantic model JSON rules. Let me quickly grab the best practices rule. And also to mention all these best practices, they are available on the GitHub. So here I have best practices rule made available by Microsoft. So you see all the JSON rules. Just gonna click to raw and I'll quickly grab this URL, right? Then in tabular editor, you have tools, you have best practice analyzer. Then you just go add the new detail, include from URL. I'm not explaining the details, but if any of you are interested, you can head over to their website. They have a really nice recorded session where they explain all of it. So my goal here to just show how it is done today. So here I have results. So this BPA just analyzed my semantic model, and here I have all the results available. And then you can see here I have the name, the type, and the severity. So I have 2, somewhere 1. So these are all type 1 or 2. So it's either informational or warning. There's no errors in this model right now. So it's okay. It's nothing that I need to be concerned about. It's best if you want to fix it, but it's okay even if you ignore it. It's not going to cause any performance issue or any logical issues. So that's how semantic model looks like. And I will close this quick, and then let's look like what does the report looks like, right? So I have PBI inspector here, and I will just select my file here, right? Let me quickly just navigate to this place. Sorry, let's switch back to all files. Here's my master data set. Then I will just give it a run. And then it's open in my another skill. So this one gives me a result in an HTML page. And then here's the result. And for now, I have only one, and that says reduce the number of objects within the visual. And then it also gives me a nice representation of where exactly is the problem. So if I go back to my model, I have 1, 2, 3, and the fourth visual, and it's the first one that's causing a problem. And if you look at the description here, you can get a sense of what is the problem here, right? So what's happening here, this one has a lot of rows available, and if user can drill down, then there's just too much data available, and they will slow down the page and then my visual. So that's the best practice violation. But let's hold on here. So back to the presentation. So we saw how they are applied right now. So we saw that JSON rules are available. We saw the tools are available. Then the question comes, what is the problem? If you have the means and if you have the solution, so if you have the challenge and problem and solution, then what is the problem? The problem is it's not enforced, right? So the two method that I showed you, how often would you do it in the real time? Or if you have a new joiner in your team, somebody who doesn't have much experience, how often would they remember to execute it every time, right? So both rules are available, tools are available, but the problem is you can't enforce them right now. There are some complicated ways of enforcing them, but it mostly relies on the discretion of developer. Maybe the developer, it doesn't feel like it, or maybe they just forgot it, or maybe they are in a rush and they must publish it as soon as possible. So they choose to ignore both of the processes. They don't scan their semantic model for violations. They don't scan their report for violations, right? So that's the main challenge here. And that was the whole motivation. How do we fix that? How do we enforce these best practices in our development lifecycle? So we make sure that without evaluating the best practices, you cannot make changes in the actual report or data model, right? All right, let's look at how do we answer this question. So first, some prerequisites. First, we're talking about Power BI. So either you should have a Power BI premium capacity or a Fabric capacity, and you must have a Pro license. So Pro license is the actual creator license. So you need Pro license, whether you have premium or Fabric, doesn't matter. So you must, as a developer, have a Pro license. I assume you might already have one. And then you need either a premium capacity or a Fabric capacity. That's the only two type of capacity where you can use Azure DevOps with your workspaces. Then let's talk about Azure DevOps, of course. So first, you need an active account and you need a license. You don't have to worry about it. Maybe you just raise a request and your team will fix that, or your support team or service desk or your DevOps team, whoever is the responsible one. Then either you should have access to a repository or you have the right to create a repository for your project. And the third one is again related to Power BI. So in Power BI admin portal, we have a tenant setting. And the setting is user can synchronize workspace item with their Git repositories. Now this setting has three different ways of enforcing itself. First, your admin can either disable it for everyone in the tenant, like in the whole organization, so nobody can use it. Or second, they can allow a certain set of users to use it. So not others, but only the people who are allowed to use GitHubs or any kind of Git repository, whether it's a GitHub or it's their DevOps, only they will use it. So make sure you are in those list of people who are allowed to use Git repositories, right? And then they can again specify whether they only want to allow Azure DevOps or also GitHub. So make sure you talk to your admins about this, right? Then let's look at a quick development workflows. How does it look like? Now, this one is straight out of Microsoft Docs, like how can you work with it? So once you have Git integration or DevOps integration with your Fabric workspace or Power BI workspace, there are different ways of working. So first here is we have user one on the left. They can make changes in Power BI desktop and they could choose to save it as PBIP folder. Then using VS Code, they commit it to a Git repository. And then when they are committing it, they must create a feature branch. It's not, they cannot directly commit into the main branch. So they commit into a feature branch. So in this scenario, we have one user who's committing from Power BI desktop and making a feature data set branch in the Git. And then we have another user too who's directly working in a workspace. Like now you can edit data sets and report in workspace as well. And then they create another feature branch for report changes. And once those changes are available in the Azure DevOps repository, you have a build pipeline, and that's where we enforce it. And that's where we check for violations. And then you have a team lead that's merging the changes to the main branch. And then finally, they are syncing it with the team workspace. So that's one way of working. That's the way of working if you are not directly using Power BI Desktop. And that's the way of working if you have already switched to PBIP or you are directly using your workspace to make the changes, right? That's something we might do in the future. But right now, the situation is a bit different. So we'll also talk about the other type of working method that we are doing at our organization right now, right? So how do you enforce? We have 4 simple steps. First, we will connect our workspace to Azure DevOps repo. Then we will create an Azure DevOps pipeline. Then we will define some branch policies. We'll talk about them in detail when I'm demoing how to do it. And finally, we will create a pull request. So out of these 4 steps, the first 3 are kind of like a one-time setup. You will connect your workspace to DevOps once, you will create a DevOps pipeline once, you will define branch policies once. But the fourth one, creating a pull request, that will happen every time you try to commit changes or push changes to your main branch. We'll see that how does that work, right? So before that, let's talk about demo setup, how we are demoing today, what is our environment setup. So first we have some sample Contoso PBX file from our Italian friends from SQL BI. Then we have a Azure DevOps repository. And then we have 2 Power BI workspaces. I have a pre-dev and I have a dev. So pre-dev is where all my teammates, including myself, we commit the changes. And the dev workspace is the actual dev workspace. And all the changes in the dev workspace, they are best practices enforced. So we don't allow directly to commit to dev workspace. And from the dev, you can either choose your existing Power BI deployment pipelines to move content to test and then production, or you can build that also in your Azure DevOps build pipeline that we want to deploy to the further workspaces as well. We're just not using it for now. Okay, sorry about that. Let's move on and look at how does the demo workflow look like. So what I will do and demo is from my local machine, I will make some changes in Power BI Desktop. I'm not using PBIP, I'm not using TeamDel, just straight old PBIX file. I'll make some changes, then I'll publish it to my pre-dev workspace. You could also have individual dev workspace for each of your team members. Then I'll create a feature branch, and then I'll sync my changes from pre-dev to feature branch. Then I will create a pull request, and that pull request will run my build pipeline. And build pipeline is where I'm checking for best practices. And if build pipeline succeeds, that means all the changes are in order, nothing is broken, nothing is being violated. Then I'll merge it to the main branch, and finally I'll sync my main branch to my team or dev workspaces, right? And that's dev workspace is the one that always have the best practices enforce content. If it violates the best practices, it doesn't make it to the actual dev workspace. Let's look at everything. How does it look like in real life? So let me switch to my Firefox here. So here's my dev workspace. I already have this master dataset file here. It's called dev sales hub. Then I have another one called pre-dev sales hub. So that's my individual workspace. I also have the file here, right? So first step is we need to connect our workspaces to our DevOps repository. Okay, let me show you the DevOps repo as well. So here I have this repository called Sales Hub. There's no commits here, just a README default file. Back to Power BI, and then let's start with Dev Sales Hub, right? And then first we need to connect it to a DevOps repository. For that, I go to Workspace Settings, right? Then I go to Git Integration. Then the GitHub is currently disabled. So you can also do the same with GitHub. A bit of steps might change and you might have to set up in a different way, especially the authentication. But you can also do it for GitHub. So I will just select Azure DevOps. Another important pointer here, the Active Directory account that you have in your Power BI or Fabric should be the same as what you have in DevOps. Because in some organization, if you have multi-tenant or if you are on 2 different subscription, or then it could be that you have different email address and that won't work. Your EUPN should match across your Fabric and Azure DevOps. All right, let's click on connect. Then I will select my organization here, Fabric Git trials. Then I have Sales Hub. I'll select just the main branch. I don't want to give a folder, connect and sync. Right. So first, when I connect it for the first time, the GitHub checks, sorry, the DevOps repository checks. If there's no content in there, but only content in the workspace, then the content gets copied over from the workspace to the DevOps. If you don't have content in your workspace, but you have content in the DevOps, then the content gets copied from DevOps to your workspace, right? When it's done, you can see the status here synced. You also have a, let me show you here. So you have the time here, the last sync, which branch is connected to. And if you head over here, you will see synced. So this means your content is synced properly. And then let's look at here. You see source control 0. That means all the changes are synced across both your workspaces and the GitHub. So one important thing to mention, when you connect it to a Git repository, whether it's DevOps or it's a GitHub, only the metadata is copied over. Neither your data source credentials goes over to the Git and nor the data. So your data and credentials only stays in your Power BI or Fabric workspace, right? All right, I have it here. Then that's the first step. You just create, you just connect it to the repo. Head back here. Let's refresh this page. Right, and I have the commit here. So when I made the first commit, the changes are synced, and then I have these two files here. So next, I will go to the pipeline because I should set up a pipeline next step. Then I'll go to the pipelines here, and then I'll say a new pipeline. It's quite simple. And here you choose where is your code. In this case, my code is in my Azure repos. You can also get the code from GitHub as well if you want. So Azure repos code. Then you select which one is your repository. In this case, it's Sales Hub. Then we need to select what kind of pipeline you have. So it's the initial starting configuration point for your pipeline. So in this case, I'll select starter pipeline. And then I get a bunch of YAML code here. So first thing is you delete this code. And then here we need to enter the code, or at the code, they will do the evaluation for us. And that's also quite simple. So Microsoft has made this initial starter CI/CD pipeline. And this pipeline has everything you need to enforce your best practices. So I will just copy it from here, copy raw file, come back here, paste it. Now let's take a few seconds to understand what's going on in this pipeline. And this would help if you would like to add some new validations, new quality control, or you want to modify anything in this. Let me zoom in a bit. So first we have a stages. So we only have one stages here. It's called a build stage. Then we will have two different jobs here. First job is build data set. Let's look at it. What's going to happen here? Then you have multiple steps. First you check out, and then you have different PowerShell tasks. So PowerShell is how we are going to execute these tasks that we want to do, right? So first task is going to download Tabulator 2 and the default best practices rule. So if you look here, you have the download URL. Here we specify where are the binary files available for Tabulator 2. And why not Tabulator 3 is because Tabulator 3 is a paid version. You won't have access to their binaries unless you install it in your machine and pay a license for it. Tabulator 2, it's available on GitHub. You can directly download it from there. So using PowerShell, we are downloading those binary files. Then second task, in the first task, first is we are downloading the binaries. And the second part is we are here downloading the BPA rules. So if you look at it, that's the Microsoft GitHub repository where I copied the best practices rules earlier. Now, at the moment, there are two different versions available, one from Microsoft, another from the Tabulator team itself. So you can choose whichever rules you prefer. Or if you want to customize it, because that's the important part about best practices, you can customize it by adding new rules, removing rules, or changing the severity of those rules. You can also keep a JSON file in your root directory of your DevOps, and then you just change it to the download URL, and you just give the name of the new path that you have here. So just a minor change, and then you have totally customized your rules. Right. Then second task, we will run those rules. So we will execute this tabulator, and then we will provide these rules as the external input. Like that's the file that I want to use to scan my model for the best practices. And then it's just a bunch of other code to make sure if you have more than one data model, all of them are being scanned. So it's not just one. So it's an iterative code. We get the metadata for each kind of data set, with each data set that's available, and then we run those through Power BI Best Practice Analyzer. And it's just a bunch of other stuff like logging and things. You will see how it looks like. The second job is building the reports, and it kind of the same process. So in the task, we first download the PBI inspector. That's a tool we used earlier. So it's an open source tool. The binaries are available on the GitHub. So we download the binaries. Then we also download the rules that's available from the PBI inspector team or from the guy. Like it's just one person who did it. Fantastic job. Or if you would like to customize them, then the same concept. You download the rules in your machine. You add rules. You change the log level for those rules, and you load the file to the base directory of this DevOps repo, and then you change the path here. And then in the second task, we are just running it. We will just execute the report PBI inspector executable file. Then we'll supply the JSON files as the input, and then we will evaluate each of the reports. So not just one report, but all the reports in your Power BI workspace will be scanned for best practices. All right, that's all. Let's stop it. So these are all the tasks here. Then next, we will just save and run this. Then let's give it a name to my commit, and just let's like building pipelines. Save and run. And when you save it, it's gonna take a few minutes, depend on how many data set or reports you have in your workspaces, because they must be evaluated for the first time. And the moment you save your pipeline, they must evaluate. So we need to wait a few seconds or maybe a minute. Let's see. Just refresh it. All right, let me check if there are any comments, any questions for me.
Tian, hi, how's it going? Thank you very much. Do you want to answer the questions?
Yeah, we can
now?
take some questions because it's going to take
Okay.
a few seconds for the pipelines to run. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So first of all, the question that is coming from Pedro is just asking if the presentation can be available after the session. If you can share the PDF or something like that.
I can send it over to you, but it's like because everything that I'm showing, it's in my blog. So I would rather recommend that you head over to the blog, Pedro. Then you have
Awesome.
all the steps, all the instructions with screenshots and all the other pointers that I was talking about.
You
So
can just
there are
share it.
some pointers that's not in my presentation.
Okay, cool. So there's another question, not related to the Power BI itself or the Azure DevOps. It is from Humayun Afzal. There are some several lake houses in Microsoft Fabric with a lot of tables. If they connected to Microsoft Purview within Microsoft Fabric, will it provide the ability to search tables, columns, names in Microsoft Purview?
It's beyond my expertise, I must say. So I'm not familiar with. I know what is Microsoft Purview is, but I don't work with lake houses and Purview. So I'm not the right person to answer this question, Humayun.
Yeah, but from my understanding, it is in Microsoft Purview, you can create your data catalog, and there, of course, the names of the tables and columns will be available to you once you connect to the lake houses from Microsoft Purview. And there's another question for you from Natalia. It is, I guess, related to the pull requests. Who will be an approver for all changes?
Good question. So I will show that in my demo, and we have the flexibility to choose who will approve the request. And then I will cover that in the next few seconds because the pipeline has completed, and then we have some errors. Let's look at that. Then I'll cover this question in the next few minutes. Thank you, Mehrdad.
No worries. And the last question or comment is coming from VDN. Please forward links of the session or text. Sorry. No worries. You joined late. No worries. The session will be recorded and available in our YouTube channel immediately. So, Tian, over to you, and I'll be back.
Yeah, thanks, Mehrdad. Okay, everyone. So our pipelines are done, and then I have these results here. So it's all complete. We have a bunch of warnings. You can see a summary here. So we have 71 warnings, and then you can scroll down. And if you want details, you can just click on one of them. and see how all of our 2 build steps that we have, jobs have been run and what kind of errors we have. So it's just a summary of what we saw earlier in our, when we're doing it manually, right? It's the same thing. But as I said, no errors, just warnings. So let's ignore them for now. We don't care about warnings. We are programmers. Okay, so back here, right? Sorry, where is pipeline? All right, so second step is done. Now we have a build pipeline. Third, we need to make sure that nobody can commit directly to my main branch, right? And for that, we will set up some branch policies. So let's look at what are these branch policies. Where do we find them? So for that, we go to the repos here, and we go to the branches. And then let me zoom in a bit. So you have this more options here, and that's where you find branch policies. Zoom out. All right, so first thing that we have, and the question from Natalia, who will be the approver? So first thing, I can define in my branch policy itself that I always want at least one reviewer, and that will always be enforced. If there's no reviewer set at the creation of each pull request, then you can't make a pull request. You must have a reviewer. But in this case, I won't set this up, but I'll show you later how to manually add a reviewer. And what do we need to do here is I will just add a build validation. For that, I will just go to this plus, and then I will select the pipeline that I would like to run. And the pipeline is called, I think it's this one. Okay, give me a sec. Let me check the name of the pipeline. I have multiple with the same names. All right, that's the one that I created. Sales have 7. So here's the pipeline that I have set, and then it's the automatic trigger. Policy is a must. It's not an optional. I must want it. And let me zoom in a bit so you can read it. It says build must succeed in order to complete pull request. So if my build fails, then you cannot complete the pull request. And that's how we enforce the best practices in our development lifecycle. So if any of the best practices with a high severity level is like whether it's an error or it will fail. And if the build fails, you can't complete the pull request, right? So let's go back. Then I will just write a name here, evaluate best practices, save. Right, let's head back. All right, so I have seen my pipeline, I have seen my branch, it looks all okay, everything is set here. Now, next we need to create a pull request. So these are the first 3 steps that you will only do once per project, once when you set up all the requirements prerequisites, that's been done. Now let's check how does the actual working looks like. So for that, I'll go to my report here, right? And then let me try to create a new measure. So what I will do, I will just create a measure, and that's called a measure, and then I will just hit enter. And why this? Because this happens a lot of time, right? In our models, multiple times we try to create measures, but we don't provide anything. We click somewhere and the measure is saved. And now you have an empty measure called measure. If you publish it and you have self-service users who's using this model, they don't know what does it mean. They will bring it out to their screen, and then there goes your user experience. That's one. Second, what I will do, I have this chart, and let's say I don't like this blue color, right? It's given by my team, my company, who has a theme chart, a theme of colors, but I don't like it. I want to change it. So what I will do, I will change it from lines, and then I'll go to color, and I will just change it to something like this, right? Now, it looks nice to me, but remember, it's a theme color. So by technically, I shouldn't be doing this because my organization doesn't want me to play around with these colors. I'm not maintaining the brand image at all. Let's see what happens. So these are the 2. Then I will just publish it to my, okay. All right, let's try to publish it in my main workspace that I have. And that was called Dev Sales Hub. Okay, so it's published here. Let's not this screen. Let me try to find the right one here. Okay, I'm here, and then I see I have uncommitted changes and my source control pen. So I have 2 uncommitted changes here. So what should I do? Let's try to commit it. I will just say some changes. And then I get a message, I cannot commit changes. Committing to this, let me zoom in a bit. Committing to this branch is forbidden due to branch policies. So that's the first step where I have enforced it. If somebody forgets the way we work and they directly try to commit it to the main workspace, they can't, because you have not coming through the right way. And the right way is to create a pull request and then merge the changes. So it's not allowed. All right. This one is working fine. And then how can I do it, right? So one method is, if I'm going this way, I can check out a branch, or I can use my pre-dev. Let me go this way then. First thing, I'll check out a new branch, and I will just call it feature dataset. I can give it any name that I want, and then I will check out a new branch. And those of you who haven't worked with anything DevOps, I think before you start working on it, do a refresher on how does version control and DevOps work like, so you know what does it mean to check out a new branch, or what is a pull request and what is a merge or commit and all. I will just say made changes. Right. So now I'm committing changes to my other branch. I'm committing it to the data set, not in my main branch. I tried to commit it in the main branch, but it failed. It didn't let me commit it there. And that was the goal, right? Let's come back here, refresh. It's smart enough, DevOps is smart enough to know that you have created another branch. It gives you an option. Would you like to create a pull request? And yes, I would like to create a pull request, right? Let's create a pull request. I will just say made changes. And then to answer a question from Natalia, who is the approver, you can choose the name here. So it's not mandatory. If I have selected this option while setting up the branch policy, then I need to provide at least one reviewer all the time. But this time I can choose. I can choose myself. I can choose a team lead. You can have a dedicated person. But for this demo, I won't do it. I will just do create. Right. So my pull request has been created. And as the creation part, I have a policy applied. And the policy says the build has to succeed. So what will DevOps do once the pull request is triggered is it will try to run my pipeline. And my pipeline has the code that checks for best practices violations. So it's going to take a few seconds again, because it's running the checks to see, and we can look at evaluate best practice. That's the pipeline that we had set up. Right, let's give it a sec. All right, in the meantime, do we have some other questions that we can take?
No question for now.
Awesome. Then, okay, so it's being executed. It will take a few seconds, and then I can give you some other pointers. Is because earlier I mentioned when you have any Git setup, whether it's GitHub or whether it's Azure DevOps, they don't access your data source credentials. They don't access your data. So your data and credentials stays in your Fabric or Power BI workspace. They don't go over to the Git. They only take the metadata. So one thing that's usually overlooked is when you sync back the changes, because your model doesn't have any data, it's just metadata, you must make sure that you are refreshing your model. Otherwise, your model will have no data and the user won't see it. So the preferred way to do it is, and that's not a part of this demo, just to clarify that, we have Fabric REST APIs, and with those REST APIs or Power BI REST APIs as well, you can build it in your pipeline itself, that after deploying or syncing changes back to your workspace, you trigger a refresh of your data set. So you make sure your model has data when users are trying to look at the reports. All right, so we have some problems here, and looks like our build has failed. Right, let's check what's going on. So I will just click on here to get to the screen. And this time I have 3 errors, and that's a problem. I don't care about warnings, but now I have 3 errors. Let's look at what are the errors. First one, measure violates rule, some stuff. Expression reliant object must have an expression. And that is because the measure that I created, if you look back in Power BI, it doesn't have a definition, it's just empty. So it says it must have an expression, and that's an error because it results in a degradation of performance and service. Right? It's not the optimal user experience, and that's the severity 3, so you get it in error. The second one is related to the first one, that there is no format string defined because I didn't define how do I want to format it. The third one comes from the report. So you can see here, build, okay, let me zoom in a bit. So you have build data set, and last one comes from build reports, and that's a ensure chart uses theme color failed with result. So if you can look at the result, you will see the color code and all. So I have 3 problems because I broke 3 serious best practices here. I don't have an expression for my measure. I don't have a formatted string, and I'm using a different color than the theme color that's allowed from my organization. So I'm not allowed to push changes, and these changes will remain in my other workspace. They won't make it to my main branch. So with this, we have effectively enforced the best practices. As long as I don't fix it, I cannot merge my changes back to the main branch, right? So how do we do it? Let's take a look at it quick. Quite simple. So first thing I know, this measure, okay, I already reverted this one. So let's see, I have this color. I must change back the color here. Right. And the measure, I have deleted it already because I just pressed revert it. Then I go, sorry, let me look at this one. Rows, control cells. Tab sits up here. Publish it, replace it. Done. Back to Power BI. Let's refresh this workspace. Then we see we have some uncommitted changes. I'm still in my feature branch, so I can commit it directly. I will just say fix the report. Select the files, commit. Right, nothing here. And now if I head over here, now the fantastic part is you don't have to raise a new pull request because it automatically detects that you have made a new change. Right, it's smart enough to know that, and then it will automatically trigger the pipelines again. And then it's already running the checks again. So what will happen this time is those pipeline is being run again. We will revert those, we repeat those steps, we'll download the binary, and then we will check the model and report for best practices. And then it's gonna take a couple of seconds again. And then when all the checks are successful, like there's no errors, only warnings, then we have the option to complete it. Or I can just set it up auto complete here, or I can manually do it complete. So I will just wait for a few seconds so I can show you guys how does it look like. Right. So it's also, if you have more than one file, the steps are repeated for every file, so it might take more time. So if you have 20 data sets and model data sets and report in the same workspace, then your pipeline will take more time because it has to evaluate all of them. If it's just one, in this case, in this demo, it's only one data set and one report, it's a bit quick. So we just get results within seconds. Then you can also see the history here. That's my commit. Okay, it succeeded. I have a check mark here. Then I can look at the results. I'm back to my warnings, don't care about them. Right, let's go back to our pull request. And now I have the option to complete it. And then I will just click on complete. And then there are different merge types, right? And I'm not gonna go into the details what this merge type is. You can read it on the DevOps documentation. And then I have just 2 options that I need to care about. Is the important one is delete feature dataset after merging. If I select that and complete merge, the branch that I have, that will automatically get deleted. This is useful when you are only using new branches just to make sure that you are enforcing the best practices and you are not really interested in keeping track of all the changes that you have done so far in different feature branches. So in this case, my main goal was to make sure that my main branch only has validated content. So in this case, I will delete this feature branch, right? My pull request is being merged. Let's wait for it. All right, this is done. So my pull request has been completed. You have this completed stamp here. Now, important to note is because I have deleted the branch. And if you look at, if you remember this one, right? Let me zoom in a bit. My workspace is connected to my feature branch. So what happens in this case is if I try to go back to source control, I get a reminder the Git branch was deleted because I deleted the Git branch. And now I can switch back to my main branch. And that's if you want to work in the same workspace. But if you work in two different workspaces, then you can always keep on deleting the branches. Right. So let's go back to our presentation. Right. That's all about the demo. Next. Okay. We are done here. Let's talk about a bit of benefits and limitation. So it's kind of what we talked about the importance earlier. So I have made sure that in my workspace always have best practices validated content. So it's guaranteed. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what tool you use Tabulator, Power BI Desktop, PBIP, Tyndall. It doesn't matter. Without validating it, without raising a pull request, you just won't be able to merge this back to the feature branch. So it's guaranteed. Then you can also use some advanced quality tests. Like in this case, we just use out of the box or let's say community defined best practices. But in certain cases, like one of my teams, I don't want them to write long SQL queries in the Power Query itself. I want them to use a view or a mart from my database. So what do? We have advanced Python script that checks if there's any SQL query present in Power Query. Then we fail those checks and then we ask those users, okay, not allowed. We cannot use SQL queries in Power Query. Right. Then it enhances our team efficiency. We know whoever junior or less experienced person we have, they're not gonna mess up at least the standards. That's something that we already know about we shouldn't be doing. So it helps us in that way. And independent of development method, we talk about this, doesn't matter which tool you use, it's always there. Best thing, maybe the best thing is no extra cost on license. So as a developer, you already have a pro license, you might have a premium capacity already, or now we are all moving to free fabric capacities when your enterprise agreements end. There might be some cost from the DevOps side, but just make sure maybe they have an enterprise package and you don't need to pay extra. That's why I have a little star up there, right? And then the final part is you can customize it as you want. You don't like some of them, you can reduce the severity from error to warning. You want some of them to be enforced, you can increase the severity from warning to errors, or you can define your own ones, right? And then so far, I have only one limitations that I have found. Like there are some advanced best practices. Like if you want to check that my model shouldn't have many-to-many relationships, they are not possible right now because for that you need to have Vertipack analyzer and then you need to annotate the results to the model. It's a bit of a hassling work. They cannot be automated in the uh, DevOps pipeline right now. Right. With that, we are almost at the end of the session. I have few key takeaways for everyone. It's like simplest one is if you can use best practices, use them. You avoid common mistakes, learn from other people's mistakes, don't repeat those mistakes again. Customize them as much as you want, as much as you can, or reach out to community if you want some new best practices to be defined. Community is ever helpful. You always have people helping you out with that. And then finally, if you have DevOps or if you are struggling with the same problems, then enforce them with DevOps. That's my key takeaways from this session. Any questions, new questions that we have?
Cool, Tian. Great presentation and demonstration. That was awesome. I really personally liked it. That's how you're combining, actually technologies from Microsoft. The Azure DevOps. You're just using the other skills. It is not only the Power BI itself. We are also learning the how to work with the Azure DevOps and source control. And for those who are not familiar with that, I recommend to just learn about it. You don't have to be expert on it, but it is always good to know how it is working and what are the best practices. That is awesome. So we've got a great question. I did like it from Natalia.
Yeah,
You
that's good,
can
right?
just answer that. Are there any logs or detailed error messages that can help to debug, the errors, or all we have the errors on Azure DevOps and they will be enough to debugging? For example, which chart was causing that specific error? Yeah, you can
Yeah.
just please
Yeah, I
answer the
can take
question.
that one. So great question, Natalia. And then important here is, so the errors that you got in the DevOps, they give you the starting point, like what is not working, what is being violated. And the way we treat it is the three samples we saw which color is the problem, right? Second one, for the measure name, we got which measure is causing the problem and what is the problem. So you have that as a starting point. Then second, of course, you need to go to your developer, or if it's you who has made that problem change in the first place, then you can head back to your PBIX file and see where exactly it is raised. In case of semantic model issues, you will get a name, which column, which or text measure with calculation group is causing the problem. In case of reports, you don't directly get the visual name because we don't define a visual name. We just have a location where exactly. So for that, what I do, we use the PBI inspector to scan it again, because there you get the location, right? So let me show you the sample here. How did it look like? So if you scan it again, you get this visual representation in case of report issues. So you can see here the red is highlighted. So the error is here, right? It would be best if each visual we can give a name. So there is a name available in the metadata, but we don't give the name like visual 1, visual 2, or XYZ. So in this case, this will just help you. Okay, the highlighted one is the problem, and there's a brief description here. And in some cases, they also have a hyperlink to something on the internet or Microsoft documentation. And that's where you can go and see what are the problems and what is the solutions available to fix that problem.
Awesome. Thanks for answering. And we have a comment from Honoria. Beautiful video. Thank you for the outreach. Thank you for your participation. So I think there is no more question. And if not, we can just jump into the riddle part.
Awesome.
So,
All right, let's put your game face on.
cool.
So
Natalia just sent her, thanks, full for the presentation. And yeah, sure. Please, share with the community if you success with something that is actually basically learned from the community. We always can, just learn from the failures. Maybe you just, face an issue or something like that. You can just reach out to Tian or other experts and to the community if you have any
yep.
question on that,
And
or
like
if
important
you're
part, right?
succeed.
So what you mentioned, Meherda, just to add to that, the two tools that we look at today, they are built by the community. It's the community who came up with the idea of making rules that you can execute and evaluate against. Like imagine if you have 1,000 measures in your model, and then you have to manually go through them. It's like weeks work and you can miss out. But with those tools, they're available for free. They are by community. And if you want any new rules, you just post it out in their GitHub and then somebody will answer to you.
Sure. Cool. Guys, are you ready for the riddles? So
All right,
let's run that and
here
see
comes the
what
first
Tian
one.
has prepared for us.
Okay, so I enable teamwork without fear, keeping reports precise and clear. With each update, I make sure that nothing's lost and all is pure. Who am I? Come on, guys, we just talk about it.
Yeah, a lot.
Anyone? There are no wrong answers. Well, there are, but give it a try.
Yeah, let's see. So, come on, guys. Natalia, set version control.
GitHub. Okay,
Shamim
we're
says
getting
GitHub.
somewhere.
They're closing.
Okay, let's look at the results. Let's look at the answer.
Uh,
A few
I
more
guess
minutes, maybe.
so. Someone in, yeah, Jeffrey says BPA.
That's best practices analyzer. Okay.
Cool. I think we can just move on to the answer.
Yep.
There's
It
no
said
more comment.
DevOps for Power BI.
DevOps for Power BI. No worries. There are more riddles if you missed that.
Yep. Then I would say the closest one is the GitHub. So you can use GitHubs or you can use DevOps, same thing. Let's go on to the second one then. And here's the question. I adapt to your needs, making rules strong but not tight. With flexibility as my creed, I turn standards into might. What am I? Come on, this is an easy one. So we have the rules. They are strong, but they are not tight because you can play with them. You can modify them. You can make them easier, stronger as you want. So flexibility is the key. And the standards, you have the standards and they get enforced. And that's the power.
Natalia's is best practice analyzer.
And then we have from Miriam, BPA, same thing.
Again, Miriam, BPA, same thing.
Okay, shall we look at the answers then?
I think so.
It's best practices, customizable best practices. That's the flexibility is the key. You can.
So the first
them
winner will
strong.
be Natalia, right? Best practices analyzer, or can we accept it?
I think we can accept it. Yes.
Sure, cool.
So that's how
Natalia,
we enforce them.
our
Right?
first winner. Awesome. Cool. We can, I think, move to the third one. Or there nothing?
No,
Yeah,
I have
we
only
can
two.
just stop here. Awesome. The only winner that we have today is Natalia. Awesome. Congratulations. Natalia just reach out to our LinkedIn page or to myself and the learning room. And
But Mehrdad, I think we should consider some Shamim as well. I mean, because DevOps and GitHub, like they are like cousins. One is from somebody, another one is from somebody.
Yeah, sure. Shamim is one of the active members in our community. She's been the winner for a couple of sessions, and we really appreciate your participation, Shamim. You're one of the best members, and yeah, Shamim just sent thanks for the great presentation. Natalia, thank you. And one question: what is your favorite type of anime?
That's the secret. So I like to watch action ones. So usually, like I'm rewatching Attack on Titan right now, and then Demon Slayer. I think those are the best ones.
Cool, awesome. Comment
right.
from Anariat, and great job. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Anariat.
And Shamim, oh, thanks. Yeah, actually, no, we really like your participation and other, attendees' participations. And in this engaging, it is great to have such, a lovely community and members, and which is basically, giving us more motivation and courage to work stronger and just having a better community at the end of the day, of course. So with that said, let me just
so in the end I have a sorry okay, are you sharing your screen?
Or... yeah, I have shared my screen. If you want to share, oh, sorry, I just stopped your sharing. Sorry, my apologies.
So I just have finally the QR code, everyone. So there was some asks about the presentation. So not the deck, but here you can get all the detailed instructions with everything on my blog. You can just scan it or directly go to Bits2BI, and then you can find all the detailed instructions. Or as Mehrdad mentioned, the video will be available on YouTube, so feel free to rewatch. Or if you have any question, just shoot them to me on LinkedIn. My name is Dhyanendra. And thank you for having me here, Mehrdad, and thank you everyone for giving me your time.
That's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. Thank you very much for presenting and Microsoft Fabric Cafe. So today's session with Tian is completed. It is available on a YouTube channel once the live is completed. And for the previous sessions, if you missed them or if you rewatched them, feel free to just watch them on YouTube channel. So, and stay tuned for the next sessions in November. The registration links are already announced, but stay tuned for the reminders. So, and thanks for attending. You can just find us in the different platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, and also joining the learning room. So we can wrap up the session. Thanks everyone for joining. And if there's nothing else, at the end we can just say goodbye to people and wishing a nice weekend. And for those in India, again, happy Diwali. And yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Tian. Is there
Thank
anything
you,
else
everyone. Thank
you
you
want
for
to add?
having me here, Mehrdat. Okay.
Cool. Cheers. Have
Cheers,
a good
guys.
one. Bye-bye.
Good one.